Hi there, this is Dr. Camden, and I'm here for an Instagram Live with Joy Vetterlein. So I'm going to look for Joy and invite her on here. We're going to be talking about her journey and her faith story. So, all right. Hey there.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's morning time where you are. Pretty
Yeah, it is.
early,
It's only
right?
9. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for joining me
And
so early.
oh, you're welcome. I mean, it's not that early, but
Okay,
yeah,
good.
it's noon for you, right?
Yes, yes. And my daughter ended up being sick today at daycare, so we had to go pick her up. So she's home, the baby's home. So
Oh,
yeah, so we'll see
wow.
how this goes.
I know. I have 2 kids downstairs with a brand new babysitter, so
Okay. How old are your
hopefully,
kids?
yeah. They're my oldest just turned 8, and then my youngest is 5. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's a little easier because I'm like, kids, show your babysitter around the house. Like, show her where
Yeah.
your snacks are and how you can get them yourself. Like, there's a lot less. It's just like a playmate instead of like, here's the temperature we put the bottle at, and here's the way
Yeah.
you have to hold her to feed it, or whatever.
Yeah.
Because you have a
Yeah.
baby too, right?
Yeah, my daughter's 3.5 and my baby is just 4 months. So yeah.
Oh, little
So it's
bitty.
a lot. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
trying to fit in work and creative pursuits in
Oh my gosh.
between. Yeah, thankfully my husband works from home and has some flexibility, and
Okay.
so yeah, so we just
Yeah.
try to make it work. But yeah,
I know the feeling. I
yeah,
know I got pretty used to having my kids in school for the year. This was the first year they both were in school. And so now summer's here and I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna get all this done.
yeah,
They're always here.
yes.
Yeah.
And they're at that age where they still need monitoring, right? You can't
Yeah.
just
Well,
totally let them do their own thing.
it's like I forgot how much energy and socializing they get out at school. So when they're here,
Oh,
it's like, Mom, what are we gonna do? Mom, play with us.
uh,
Like, Mom, talk to me. I need some quality time. And I'm like so grateful they're emotionally articulate enough to be like, Mom, can we have quality time? But also I'm like, no, I don't have any quality time to give you
yeah,
right now.
yeah,
So we're figuring it out. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to share your story with me, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Thanks for asking.
yeah, and you wrote a blog about how my faith harmed my mental health. That was the title we
Yeah.
settled on, and published that
Yeah.
this week, and already
Hmm.
have gotten a lot of good response from it. I think from your people
Yeah.
and from mine. So
Yeah.
that's been cool to hear. And so we're
Yeah.
basically just gonna have time here for you to expand on your story, and
Okay.
to take just for me to ask questions and just get to know it a little bit
Okay.
more, because I felt like it was
Sounds good.
important to hear like a diverse, like different
Totally.
stories. I had
Totally.
Amanda Waldron on, who is a
Right.
good friend, and then I had
Uh-huh.
Kate Boyd, who I know you
Uh-huh.
know too. And then next
Uh-huh.
week at noon Eastern, I'm having Tim Whitaker of the New Evangelicals.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so he has an interesting story too. So yeah,
Yeah.
so just wanted to hear
It is
a
diverse.
variety. Yeah, a
Yeah.
variety of
Well, and
deconstructions.
I think that's the whole point is that for so long we all felt locked into this like there's this one way to be a Christian. And so deconstruction is just everybody getting to like make their faith their own a little bit,
Hmm.
which is what we always said we wanted people to do. Like you want
Hmm.
people to make their faith their own, but yeah, I think the diversity is like part of what's awesome about it is that
Hmm.
everybody can kind of take it and make it work with their actual real lives.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting to me how different things lead us into deconstruction, and then
Mm-hmm.
we all there's no one end that we end up in.
Yeah,
Like there's no
yeah,
like end point. So just hearing the different paths that people have taken, I guess.
yeah,
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 so first tell us a little bit about yourself, just anything you want to share personally. Like we talked about our kids already,
yeah.
but if you want to share about like where you live or your work or anything like that.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Are my AirPods
Hmm.
working okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I live in Southern California. I have just
Hmm.
always been like I didn't grow up here. I was born here, but then we moved away and I was just always drawn to it. So I was really happy I got to come to college here and then I just was like I'm going to stay here. And met my husband, he lived in DC and he came out here. And so now he's like transformed from this guy who was like ironing his his work clothes every day and shaving every day to now he's like wearing like tank tops and tattoos and he has a beard, and it's just like he's totally gotten. So yeah, California is really important to me. So we live near the beach. So yeah, I married and then I have two kids, 5-year-old and 8-year-old. And yeah, I just am really thankful to get to have found a little piece of the planet that feels like home to me. And we're just, hustling to try to stay here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
Not a
jealous
cheap
of the
place to
weather
live.
that you have, and I'm jealous of like being so close to the beach, but I'm not jealous of
Yeah.
the cost of living. So,
No, it's really stressful
yeah.
actually. But yeah, no, I have friends all over the country, and like they're so mad at me in January because they're like wearing sweaters and I like show up to a Zoom meeting in a tank top and they're like, don't even. I'm like, but it's 75. And then the summer hit and they're like, it's 95. And I'm like, it's 75. Like it's
Oh,
just
goodness.
75 all year. So yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
this isn't a like visit California tourism campaign, but
Yes,
I
but
like it.
it's a great
Yeah.
place to visit, but yeah, my
Yeah.
husband and I went and took a California road trip a few years ago before we had kids and went from like
Okay.
San Francisco down to San Diego and stopped along
Okay.
the way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it was so nice. We had such a great time, but we like just for fun looked at the real estate in San Francisco. We were like, what
Oh
could we
gosh.
afford here? And it was like a
Yeah,
house that had
nothing.
completely been fire damaged. Like that was the only thing in our like normal price range. It
Here's
was like,
here's a pile of ash.
yeah, basically it
Here's
was
what
like
you can
rubble
afford.
and
Yeah.
bricks, and like
Yeah.
the ad
Oh
said a
my gosh.
contractor's dream, and we were like, that's not for us.
We are not that person. That is not our dream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So you're in Southern California, and tell us about your faith background because I know you talked in your article for my blog about working in ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was your faith background like growing up, and then like your experience of church and leading into adulthood?
Okay. Yeah. So, when I was born into my family, my parents had actually recently become evangelical Christians themselves. My dad was raised Jewish, and my mom was raised, I think, sort of like nominally Christian, the way we imagine a lot of people in the 50s and 60s were.
Mm-hmm.
And then they both became hippies in the 60s and 70s. And so they did a lot of exploring like new age spirituality and stuff. And they like moved out to the country of Northern California. They like met in San Francisco, like the whole hippie scene, and like moved out and like lived off the land. And had like my mom had my brother and sister without running water or electricity in their cabin. Like they like went hardcore into it.
Yeah.
But then they had a conversion experience, and by the time I came into the picture, they had moved to Los Angeles, and my dad was in seminary. So I was the only kid in my family born into a Christian family.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 5, my dad graduated from seminary and got a job as a pastor of a small church in Alaska. So my whole life, I was surrounded by a lot of Christianity, a lot of like, I would say moderately conservative Christianity. It wasn't fundamental by any means, but it was leaning more towards a conservative side of theology and socializing, political opinions. So yeah, from the part of my childhood that I remember from about age 5 until I was 14, my dad was a pastor of this small church in Alaska. And so that was really my whole childhood. That was a big part of my identity, was being a pastor's kid. And I really internalized a lot of it. I went to a Christian kindergarten and I asked Jesus into my heart at school. And that was a really significant moment for me. I felt like that was I don't know. I think like the people around me made a big deal of it. So I felt like, oh, I'm part of this club that like the people I love are a part of. And like I really belong now because I really believe this and it's really important to me. And I had some significant moments with God throughout my childhood too, where it was just like me alone in my room. And I felt like I connected with like this like deep, like divine moment. And that those were really impactful in my life too. And one of the reasons why I still have some sort of spirituality at all, which we'll get to that part of my story later. But so yeah, evangelical pastor's kid all the way. I was like a good little Christian girl. All the Sunday school teachers loved me. I knew all the answers. I went to Bible camp and won the trivia contest. And yeah, just really like that was a big part of my identity and a big part of my world. My dad, then he had a pretty, like, as is typical for people in ministry, he had a really unpleasant situation and really hard and traumatic and devastating, I would say. Took them a few years, took them many years to fully recover. So he resigned, and then things just got a little chaotic, I would say, right around I was 14, which is like a great time for your world to be chaotic and lose all your friends, you know. So we ended up moving to the Seattle area, and in that time, I would say I sort of, because I didn't really trust a church anymore. I didn't have any grounding in an institution. My faith really transferred from being like something that was a part of an institution to being something that was just mine. Because I was so lonely. I had no friends. My parents were pretty distracted with everything they were going through. My brother and sister had already like grown up and left at home. So I just felt really alone. And I felt like in that moment, I really connected with God within me. And that became, that's sort of like has become true of me ever since, just that I have a connection to God within me. And so, yeah, I went through high school, ended up finding a youth group, finding some friends. And then after high school, I went to a Christian university in California. I went to Biola, and was all about that, and got the dream of working in a church and combining ministry and music. So, then right after I graduated, I started working in a church, a big, a pretty big church in this area. I think technically you'd be called a mega church, and worked there for almost 10 years, and then kind of worked in some sort of church or parachurch thing until 2019. So like my whole life, God, Christianity, churches, huge impact, whether they're there or not, huge impact on my life.
Yeah. Up until 2019, so just like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that experience, because was that the prompting event for your deconstruction, you'd say?
Yeah, I would say that along the way, just like working behind the scenes in churches, I had started having some questions and concerns, and I didn't really have a safe place to put those. When I worked in one church in the worship. Well, I always worked in worship ministry, but I just remember like feelings of looking out and seeing people on a Sunday morning and being like, why are they coming? They don't seem happy to be here. They're not engaging in this. Like, why are they here? I think this is just like a habit or a routine. Like, I don't know that anybody's lives are changing by being here. And how do I actually feel about the job that I'm a worship producer? Like, what about worship needs to be produced? Like, what about Jesus makes us think that we need to have some sort of like smooth running, well transitioning like performance each week? Like I started feeling this kind of disconnect between what I believed about God and what I was seeing about God when I did read the Bible and stuff, and what my work was. But again, that was my livelihood, so I couldn't like say I don't think there should be a worship producer, because I was one and I needed that income. And then another big piece, so the last job I had in ministry before 2019 was I ended up becoming a pastor of worship arts and communication. And when that senior pastor hired me, I had a lot of hesitancy about, can I be a woman and be a pastor? Like, is that okay? Like, I had sort of this inherited complementarianism. I wasn't like firmly like, women can't do this. But I had just inherited, and I was like not sure that it was okay. And so that pastor gave me like a ton of books and basically said, like, if you're going to do the work of a pastor, then I'm going to call you a pastor. And I don't care if you're like a man or a woman, or if you're ordained or not. Like if you're shepherding people's souls, like that's what you are. And so that really meant a lot to me. And so I took the title and felt something in me be like, oh yeah, like this feels right. Like this idea of like helping people's souls, that feels like a bit of like a calling for me. But in the process of that, I was like, wow, I had always like assumed that this wasn't okay for women to be pastors. But now I'm realizing I was wrong about that. And then it was like this thought in my head of like, is there anything else that I've assumed that I'm wrong about? And so I started like, well, okay, well, I've always had a couple questions about these other aspects of theology, and like, maybe I should explore those too, because if I am wrong about something, I want to know. And I trust God enough to know, like, to think I'm not going to get in trouble for asking. Like, that's not a safe relationship if you can't ask hard questions. And so I had some questions that were really tricky to ask, things that weren't adding up in my brain about things like the crucifixion and what Jesus really did on the cross, and things that like are pretty dangerous to ask when you're a pastor at a formerly Baptist church. You know, no one's real excited to hear that one of the pastors is like asking questions. So I mostly kept it to myself, but I alluded to this in the article a little bit, that at one point I ended up losing that job. And it was like all of that identity and all of that work I had been doing, all of that drive for my whole life that felt like it had been leading to this point of like me becoming a pastor. Like I thought this was like the push of my whole life was to lead me to this job of like, oh, I'm a pastor. This is like what I meant to do. And then like it didn't go well, and I wasn't a good fit. And then when we had like a church plant fold back in, and suddenly there was like two of us with the job, and the other guy had been there longer, and I was more of a figurehead worship leader, and he was like one who actually played, and he was like the natural choice and is still like a good friend. I was out of a job, and I don't like fault them for that decision, but they have even the pastor who hired me has, you know, pretty much the next day apologized for how he handled it, but the trauma was still done. And what was really hard, besides just being like let go and told like, hey, can you come into my office? Okay, today's your last day. Here's the box. Sign this paperwork. Go pick up your kids from the preschool. Here's your severance package. Like, that was traumatic. But then the most hurtful part was that this church that we had like moved to this area for and like invested our kids in, and they had like really welcomed us like family, and they loved our kids. It was like once I didn't work there, it was like we didn't exist anymore. And like people didn't even like reach out to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you guys like lost your job. Like that's really hard. It was like it was like a divorce, and they all chose the institution over me. And that was devastating, and still is. Like I get choked up just thinking about how much my belovedness in that community was tied to my job and wasn't ever really about me,
about
you know?
Yeah. And that's really hurtful, even more so because you didn't do anything wrong to have to leave. You know, it's not, there was no reason for them to not maintain a relationship with you. Like, were you invited to still be a member at the church, to still attend the church?
And we tried. But by then it was like, I had never gone to therapy. And this is really what the article was, is that it was after that I realized just how unhealthy I was as a person. And so my husband had a lot of really good friends, and he wanted to try to stay in community with them. So after a few months, we went back, and it was like, I mean, I realize I was like walking into like post-traumatic stress. Like I'm seeing all these people that I've like had all these hurtful things with, and I'm seeing them all at the same time in a room where I used to be the boss and now I'm not. And I'm seeing all the people that used to report to me who then like got promotions after I left because there was my livelihood was able to like give them promotions and benefits. And I would like seeing all this happen at once and people looking at me weird. And yeah, I would just have to like super like dissociate just to stay in the room. And it was actually KJ Ramsey. We were talking on Instagram and she was like, you know, that's actually not very like good for you. Can I suggest that like a situation where that has to happen is maybe like, I want better for you than that. And I was like, really? Because I was like, I had no awareness of like mental health, anything. I didn't know what was happening. I just had in my head, good people, like if you love Jesus, you fight for forgiveness. You fight for forgiveness. You do the work. And even if it sucks for you, you fight for forgiveness. I had no sense that it would be okay for me to put myself in a safe place or to listen to my body as a voice of God saying like, this is not a safe place for you. And your body's telling you that. You can listen and you can like it's going to be okay. And forgiveness is not something you can force. It's something that comes when it's ready. It's a symptom of healing. It's not the healing itself.
Okay. Yeah. That's good.
I
Yeah.
don't know if that was more than you were asking, but.
Well, I'm just thinking about, you already have the trauma of being laid off and losing your job and finding out in one day. That would be traumatic for anyone. But then you also have the added layer of this is where you worship. This is like your spiritual community. It's tied up in your faith too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have just extra layers of trauma. And so
and keep in mind that this is now a repetition of like what happened to me as a kid, where my dad had this thing and we had to leave our whole community there and all my friends and identity there. And since then, my therapist is like, funny, isn't it? How you put yourself in the exact same position as your dad, maybe thinking that you could like write the same story with a different ending, but you didn't.
So you guys tried to go back to the church, tried to still kind of attend, but you were having to dissociate to be there. It was too triggering for you. Did you find yourselves at other churches? Did you try out other things? How did that go?
We did try out another couple churches. But I think by then, because I was in worship ministry, it wasn't just like all the churches I was, most evangelical churches in America are like playing the same music, like same songs, same kind of band, same format of service. And so I found that it didn't matter which room I walked into. Once that like keys started playing the music and the guy started playing the guitar and they started playing this song that I remember singing and somebody got up to do the offering and I was like, I know how this goes. And I've been a Christian since I was 5, so I've heard every single sermon like that you can preach, like I've heard it. It just became that the experience of a worship service itself was triggering for me. And just having been behind the scenes for my whole life being behind the scenes of ministry and seeing how the sausage is made and knowing like when somebody gets up there and says this, I know what they're actually saying and I know what conversations led to this. Like when they're talking about finances from the stage, I know the code. Like I know the euphemisms because I've written them before. And I just started having like, it was like because I didn't have to protect it anymore, I started realizing just how the word I use now, I didn't have the word then, but the word I use now is toxic, like just how toxic so many of our churches are and just how manipulative the language is. And I just got really, just really put off by the whole evangelical church experience. I know some people can still go. I have a lot of people in my community who still find meaning there. But for me, it's like the whole of my life has been leading up to this. And I like what I know, I just can't. It's like people who tour a sausage factory and become vegetarians, you know? I feel like I'm not a vegetarian and I won't tour a sausage factory, but I have just been around so much church and the wounds and scars that I have unless something changes, like for me, that's not a place I can go be safe.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you about the format of service being so similar. Like, because you probably saw that I've shared that our family left our evangelical church last summer,
Okay.
that
Okay.
we were members of for many years, because I could just no longer tolerate the cognitive dissonance of being an egalitarian and a complementarian church.
Yeah.
And I knew it was, and we joined
Yeah.
anyways, but I just couldn't do it after 7 years. Plus there were some other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
but we left and we've been visiting mainline Protestant churches because I've always
Mhm.
attended evangelical. So it's like I'm ready
Yeah.
to try something different.
Yeah.
And yet the service is still very similar.
Yeah.
The worship is still very similar. The structure is still very similar. I hear things that are different, and
Uh-huh.
that is meaningful to me. Like,
Yeah.
the attitude is one of more openness,
Yeah.
than what I was used to. But the service is still very similar. So this made me think, like, should I try like a more liturgical type of church and maybe see what
Mm-hmm.
that's like? I don't know. Did you
Yeah.
ever explore anything like that, like outside of, you
I am not personally drawn to liturgy.
know?
I when I was in college, there was a big liturgical movement, and so I guess I did try a few things there, but I did not. Um, so yeah, maybe I associate it with some like people I didn't really like in that setting. But I know a ton
Okay.
of people who are moving from evangelicalism to like Episcopalianism or more like Lutheranism or
Mhm.
things where there's like a little bit more structure and it's less like
Mhm.
about the show and it's more about tradition. And that feels more
Mhm.
like there's more groundedness and
Yeah.
accountability in that
Mhm.
kind of setting than like an
Yeah.
evangelical setting where it's like whatever the senior pastor says goes. And like, guess what?
Mhm.
He's a narcissist, you know?
Mhm. Often.
Um,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's also, for a while, I did research, just like what else is there? And there's a movement out of Tampa. Um, it's called the Underground Network, I think, but they have something they call microchurches,
Hmm.
where they create churches based out of mission. So you join a church based on what your calling is. So there's like a church that like serves to help the opioid crisis or that serves the unhoused community, but it's all mission focused. So the church doesn't have a central location. I think they're building, they have like a place where like you can have meetings or events, but that's like their building fees. Otherwise, they don't put money into like a Sunday service every week and all the AV equipment and all the like preaching and stuff. Instead, they
Mhm.
fund discipleship pastors and training for their microchurch leaders. And then all the money they raise goes directly to those. They're basically, it's like a network of like 501c3 nonprofits. And I think
Mhm.
that's a really cool model just because it's like
Mhm.
totally rethinking the like once a week gathering as like the model
Mhm.
of church. So I was really fascinated by that for a while. I think
Yeah.
that's, if I ever did join any sort of spiritual community, it would be something that's much more organic and flexible and
Okay.
less tied to like
Uh-huh.
any sort of service or liturgy or anything.
Okay. Yeah. What was it like, as much as you want to share, as far as your husband and his process with this? I know he's not here, so we
Yeah.
can
I
respect
think
any
I saw him
privacy.
log in, so he might
Oh,
be here.
okay. Yeah, I saw someone better line.
Uh,
But I was just curious,
yeah.
like, how that's been, because, like, for us, it's been like we've had to make that decision together of to leave our church and what churches do we want to visit. But yet we each have our own individual faiths, and
Yeah.
everybody is going to have some different beliefs and values, even though we're on the same page about major things. So, how's it been for you guys?
Yeah. It's actually funny. Once I started becoming aware that of this word called deconstruction and having a name for what I was experiencing and talking to him about it, we sort of realized that I think he had been like low key deconstructing ever since we
Mm-hmm.
got married, but it had just sort of been like sitting quietly in the front row of the church while I did all of my work there. But
Mm-hmm.
I think because he wasn't raised. He was kind of raised nominally Christian, I would say, but had his own conversion experience in his 20s. He didn't have a lot of the um, he could kind of see things with fresh eyes. And so I think he was sort of like, ah, he was skeptical of a lot of it along the way. And so then when I started talking about it, it was like, he was kind of like, yeah, right. And it was like, oh, I didn't realize we weren't on the same page, but now we're really on the same page. So I know that this is one of the things that's the most hard for people and people in my community, where it's like, I have all these questions and I don't want to be part of this, but my spouse is like, this is a huge part of their lives. It's really important to them that our children are raised in this way. And like, how do we navigate like that one person's entire worldview has changed? For us, thankfully, it's been, we're pretty much on the same page, and he's really supportive of this work I do, which, I mean, I don't think I could post all this stuff that I post without, you know, it would bring up so much conflict at home if he wasn't in the same boat as me. So I'm really, I know what a gift that is, that we're on the same page.
I'm interested to, I wonder, I'll have to ask Tim about his experience too. I would be interested to talk to somebody who hasn't been on the same page with their spouse and how they've navigated that. But yeah, I'm glad that you guys have had each other and been partners together. Earlier you mentioned, like, even while you were a pastor, that you were starting to ask questions. And I wanted to come back to that, because I wanted to ask, like, how did you ask those questions? Because something I run into in some of the coaching I do is people are questioning this or that belief, or, you know, purity culture often with the work that I do. And we talk about different sources that they can go to search for truth and to I guess, to have those times of questioning. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, well, so just in general, I think that one thing that evangelicalism has done that's a little bit of a disservice is that it has really taught us to distrust our own discernment and own intuition, and that we always have to go outside of ourselves to find an expert to teach us about something. There's also a real emphasis on information as being the answer, and intellectualism. There's information out there that will answer your questions, and you need to find it, because it's important for you to be in right theology, because it's dangerous to not be in right theology. And I find that even when people start questioning, we still sort of carry over that mindset of like, oh shoot, I don't have the answers. It's important I go find them, because something bad will happen to me if I don't find answers right away. And the answers are outside of me. I just need to find the right people. And once I get the information, then I will be okay. So usually I first kind of like try to help people get out of that mindset. Like, first of all, there's no quiz at the end of this. Like, God is not standing there with like a timer, like tapping, like, have you figured it out yet? Like, you know, you're going to betray me by doubting, and now like, you're not going to like do the work to find it. That's not a picture of a loving God. That's a very like unhealthy relationship, with God. I mean, that would be a very unhealthy relationship with anyone who loves us, if there was a expectation. So usually that's the first thing I try to do when people have questions, just like, hey, you can take all the time. Like, the point is to enjoy the process of learning and growing. So just having the question, you've already met your goal, because you are giving voice to something true inside you. You can't have an authentic relationship with God if you're not going to be honest about what your doubts and questions are. So admitting that and embracing that and accepting that, like, congratulations, you've already arrived. Beyond that, when you start having questions, it's normal. Like, people give the example of like, you like tug on a little thread and then the whole sweater unravels, and there's this panic of like, oh my gosh, like, purity culture, but like, wait, now like my theology, and wait, what about the Bible? And like, there's all these pieces that are so intertwined. It can feel really overwhelming to feel like I have to figure it all out, and there's so much. So first, we take off the time pressure. There's no rush. You don't have to figure it all out. You can still be a whole and complete person if you don't figure it all out. But I usually just like encourage people to like pick one thing to focus on at a time and to start with the thing that they find themselves most curious about. And if you're the kind of person who you read one thing and it makes you like question something else and you want to go over here, like that's okay too. There's no rules about how you have to do research. Like if reading something about purity culture makes you question the Bible and you want to go find something about the Bible, that's fine. There's no right way to do this. There's only your way to do this. So there are like a lot of really good resources out there. But then we sort of run into this problem of like, okay, well, so I was reading all these Christian authors and resources, and they told me what I thought was true, but now I'm not sure that is true. So now I'm reading all these deconstruction resources, but like, how do I know they're telling me the truth?
Right.
And so it's like, we don't want to just trade blindly believing one voice for blindly believing another voice. And that I think is where the importance of like doing the internal work comes in. And to me, that's where mental health and deconstruction really intersect. Because if you are going to be the kind of person who like is willing to relook at what you've believed your whole life, it's gonna play into what you believe about yourself and how you see the world and how you process information and all of your experiences and how your experiences inform your perceptions and how you take in information. And so I usually encourage people like, yeah, you can read what you want, but like the more you can like get yourself healthy, like the better it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to choose what you believe. Like experts will tell you all day long what they think the opinion is, but you're just going to be like pulled around if you let other people tell you what to do. How can you cultivate a sense of groundedness in yourself so that when you see something and it resonates and true with you, you know how to recognize it and you're comfortable, like just owning that and believing that and being open to learning and growing and believing something and have that belief challenged along the way. So that's really like when people are going through deconstruction, I encourage that before I give like, here's all the books you should read, because that can just exacerbate the feeling of overwhelm when really we're trying to find like what works for you and like what does your unique expression of faith look like.
Yeah. It's so important to do the internal work and to start with that. And I'm glad you like are reminding us of that or are telling us for the first time, because sometimes in my coaching, people are like, I've got to have this figured out. Like, and sometimes there are external reasons like, well, I want to, date and get married. And so I need to figure out what I believe so that I can like, find like have that match up. And so there's this time urgency and this pressure. And so, some of what I have done is let's accept and tolerate the discomfort. Like, let's accept not knowing sometimes. Let's accept that there's going to always be uncertainty and doubt. And one of your quotes from the article you wrote of like, my beliefs are not set in stone because I'm not set in stone. I'm not all done changing or evolving. And I find that can be unsatisfying for people to hear because they're like, no, just tell me like what to do.
Well, we crave that safety of that certainty gives us. But certainty about God is kind of an illusion because we just can't know.
Yeah, we have to accept some mystery and some openness and
and the person who's like wanting to find someone today that's like, maybe it doesn't matter if your beliefs line up, maybe you find someone who also enjoys questioning things, like maybe that's the better compatibility.
And that's some of what I've said, like finding somebody who's not rigid in their thinking is helpful, rather than somebody who agrees with this and this, you're not going to line up 100% on everything with anyone.
And if you're questioning now, chances are you will also have questions in the future.
And that having kids will create more questions. And, So you said, you told us in 2019 when you left that job at the church and that was a big catalyst of your deconstruction. I imagine you've experienced some criticism, as we all do, from
Mm-hmm.
people, especially as we write about this and put our thoughts and our experiences out in the public. And
Yeah.
one criticism I often hear is that, well, that's just that church, or that's just people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not God. So
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't walk away from your faith or from God just
Right.
because of the works of sinful
Right.
people.
Right.
Have you heard that too? And what's your response to that?
Yeah. I have heard that a lot. I have, I guess one benefit of my old church sort of like abandoning me is that I don't have a lot of people from there like reading and
Mm-hmm.
following me and like,
Mm-hmm.
chiming in. So I've been a little bit insulated from a lot of criticism, and I don't really mind it on social media. It just like kind of makes me chuckle mostly because they don't know me at all. It's like, okay, like your comment, ooh, But yes, I have heard like, well, yeah, like don't you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to lose God because people. Okay, so I think what I realized is that when I did start writing about this and sharing my experiences on social media, I found so many people who had like uh, such similar experiences, if not the exact same ones, especially people in ministry. Like you know, you if you're in ministry, like this has probably happened to you or it's going to. Um, that sounds a little like cynical. I don't want to like put fear in anyone who's in ministry, but it is a very common experience.
Mm-hmm.
And like then I started becoming aware of like all the stories of the damage of purity culture, of stories of spiritual and sexual abuse happening in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you have, like in any field you're in, the process of troubleshooting is the same. Like you try to isolate, like, where is the problem coming from? Like, does this sound happen when my car is on? Or like, does this sound only happen when my car is on? Or does it happen all the time when the car moves, even if it's not on,
Mm-hmm.
So as you like try to isolate where's the root of the issue, when I started realizing that it wasn't just my experience, it wasn't just like this one person's experience, this was happening like systemically. Like
Mm-hmm.
people all over the world were sharing similar stories. People all over the country were sharing similar stories, like the similar pain, the things leading to the similar kind of like trauma. Um, when there's a systemic issue, like that's a problem. That's not just one church. There's something that all these churches have in common
Mm-hmm.
that is creating the same symptoms in all the ways. That took a long time to get that out.
No,
Sorry,
but that
but
car analogy is helpful. Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something that's happening. Like this isn't. Yes, there's isolated incidents, but this isn't an isolated incident. This is happening in a pattern, and when there's a pattern, we have a problem. Something is broken, something is rotten at the core, and until we can figure out what that core is and address it, this problem is going to continue in all the different expressions of it. Like if the root of the tree is broken, every part of the tree is going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the point at which I realized that's maybe where it transitioned from like, oh, churches are the problem to like, wait, if all churches are having the problem, then what do all churches have in common? And that's when I realized there's something in what we believe about God and in what we believe God wants from us that is making all of us sick. So like, what is it? And that's the point where I really started deconstructing my faith.
Okay.
Um, because I was like, oh, it's not just churches. There's something in our theology that's broken,
Mm-hmm.
that's making people sick. So when people say that's just a unhealthy church or you shouldn't throw away God because of this thing, I say it's like, no, this isn't just one problem. This is happening all over Christianity. The evidence is there, the number of eyewitness statements, the data and is there that there's
Mm-hmm.
something about how we've understood God that isn't right. And so that's what I'm trying to do to get to the bottom of how
Okay.
have we understood God in such a way that is creating all of this
Yeah.
havoc. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense because even I was thinking about like the problem of sexual abuse in the church. Like I'm thinking that doesn't happen, that may not happen at every church, or it may just
Right.
not be reported. But the fact that
Yeah.
is happening so widespread does
Yeah.
indicate that we need to look at the system and
Right.
what in our theology is allowing this problem to occur
Exactly.
so widespread.
Exactly.
Our beliefs about gender, our beliefs about sex, our
Yes.
abuses of power, things like that. So it
Yes.
makes sense that that would cause you to question theology too, and that it's not
Yeah.
just about this one church or this one job loss, that it's a more
Right.
systemic issue for you. Yeah.
Right. That's a perfect analogy because and you do this work, like you're like, oh, look at all this like sexual abuse and the problems of purity culture. We can trace them
Mhm.
back to this
Patriarchy.
harmful
Yeah.
complementarian theology.
Mhm.
So I think for me, having like my work having been so much in like the how do we help people grow in their faith, like this
Mhm.
discipleship, if like
Mhm.
people aren't growing and they're hurting and they're not seeing change, like what's at the root of that? And that's where
Mhm.
I've come to like, oh, we've misunderstood what it is that God wants from a close relationship with us.
Mhm. Okay.
And so it's like, yeah, that's a really good analogy. It's like,
Yeah.
what are these problems? What's the theology driving all of these?
Mhm.
And where have we
Mhm.
gone wrong?
Yeah. So, since I've been following you, since you've been writing, probably a couple years, I've noticed an evolution in your beliefs just since I've been following
Totally.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You used to call your hashtag was Christian Misfits, and now it's
Yep.
Spiritual Misfits. That's one thing I
Yes.
noticed, and
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, so talk about just the evolution just more recently, and
Yeah.
any experience. Like I'm asking people about faith reconstruction. What does your faith look like today?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
and that may look differently or mean different things to us.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what's it been like more recently with your evolution since you've been
Yeah.
writing about this?
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. When I started, I was really trying to help Christians who didn't feel like they fit into church, sort of
Mm-hmm.
more of like a social feeling, and trying to help people be like, you belong with God. You like, even if you don't fit in with the demographic of the people at your church. Um, but along the way, as I got more exposure and as I kept going like further and further to like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
no, what's at the root of that? What's at the root of that? What's at the root of that?
Mm-hmm.
I found that I was connecting. A lot of my questions were starting to come up about like some of the core beliefs of evangelicalism and Christianity. Like I said, the crucifixion, realizing that there are other ways of looking at what Jesus did on the cross um, than as like the penal substitutionary atonement. And along the way, as I was serving people, I found people who had had so many traumatic experiences with Christianity that they could no longer hold that word. That they're like, I can't call myself this. I can't associate with
Mm-hmm.
how everybody else is understanding this word Christian. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can in good conscience to myself be a part of that. And so I started realizing that using Christian terminology was actually keeping me from serving the people that I really cared about serving. And so I also felt like it locked me in to like, okay, I can like explore my faith, but only in the confines of what like this set of people said is an okay way to think about God. And so I shifted to spiritual misfit just to allow myself and others a more open-ended expression of faith. Where I'm at now, yeah, I don't talk about it a lot. One, because I don't want anybody to look at me and say, oh, what does Joy believe? Let me believe what she believes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to like undo
Mm-hmm.
that thought that like we need to look to other people to tell us what to believe. I'm more about like, let me ask you some questions that will help you figure out what you want to explore and where you want to research and what you want to believe. But the other reason I don't talk about it a lot is because it literally changes like daily. Like everything I learn, I'm like, oh, okay, let me bring that in. And like suddenly it's a new faith. So I feel like anytime I like post anything, I get like all these comments of people like giving me more information. And the next day I'm like, well, okay, well, that post is like already obsolete. Like there's just no point. So I am really yeah, I am just allowing myself to be real messy and wrestly with everything right now. I hold in one hand that the experiences I had with God and evangelicalism were really real and meaningful, and that is the path that I took to find God. Um, and so I really honor that that is for some people a really meaningful path. I also honor that there are a lot of other paths that I'm seeing people take, and find meaning in. I have really tried to rid myself of any arrogance towards saying, oh, this person's experience of truth, like they can't be right, because I know better. Like if someone has evidence, if someone has a meaningful relationship with their own spirituality, and I can see the evidence of it in their life and the goodness of like the peace and joy that it brings them, who am I to say that that can't be? Like, do I really know so much that I know better than this person's lived experience? Am I really going to say that? Or can I like see them and learn from them? So I have heard some people, I don't really have a label right now, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't have a label. I'm just in a season, I would say, of being really curious and trying to be really open and really humble. And just like embracing paradox, like evangelicalism can lead some people to God. I'm also seeing people find truth that seems a lot like what I've experienced as truth in traditions like Buddhism. How do I hold those two together? Right now, I'm just going to hold them together and like think about it and let that just be. So yeah, I feel a lot of freedom to just like be curious, let my questions lead me, and to just, yeah, it's like, I think I wrote this post once. It's like, you know, that scene in Willy Wonka where they're in the room with all the like the chocolate waterfall and like everything's edible. I feel like I've been living in that room my whole life and only just now discovered that everything is edible. It's like God has created this beautiful world full of like so many ways to get to know God. And for most of my life, I was just looking at it and getting to know God through this one lens. And now that I feel like it's God who has sort of like gently taken those limitations off me and said, like, I am bigger than this. Here, try these things. I feel like now I'm like, wait, I could maybe find God in this way. Like I could maybe find God in this thing, like this experience. I could find God in this person that I have nothing in common with. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. And it's so like exciting to feel the freedom to just find God everywhere and not try to limit where it's okay to find God.
Yeah. I love that intellectual humility of like, I'm still learning, and something I wrote, like, I no longer agree with, or now I have more information. Because I shared the post that you wrote, maybe it was last week, about abortion and your feelings about that. And then I saw you wrote like a couple days later, like, I have different feelings now. Like I've learned more about it just since then. And I feel that way when I look.
Some people who were like, I feel so betrayed. And I'm like, no, we don't want to be locked into a thing. That's not the goal here. We want to be learners. It's a good thing. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I look back at things I wrote a year ago and I don't always agree with them, or I wouldn't use that word anymore, or that term, or, and I've even said, like, it's okay. I welcome followers who don't agree with me, because I don't agree with me 100% on everything. So, yeah, so I love that humility and just that openness, and that you model for us, and the respect for people to find God in different ways. So what advice or encouragement do you have for those going through deconstruction? What would you go back and tell yourself, or what do you wish you had known?
I think just kind of what I said earlier, that like there's no due date, there's no rush, there's no right answer necessarily. Like it's okay. You're not doing something wrong. You're not betraying God. And I think just reminding people that or encouraging people to like, what is your image of God like? And if it's anything but kind, maybe that's not, maybe there's something else in there besides God. Maybe that's some voices from your past that are like sort of coloring your picture of God. Because there's nothing but kindness, I feel like, when it comes to questions and doubts. God isn't like interested in you despite your questions. I think God genuinely loves your questions. He loves you for your questions. Like curiosity is a virtue. Curiosity is like a fruit of the Spirit. It is a gift, and it is meant to lead us into these things. It is meant to make us curious. Like, do we really think like a good God would say, here's all your beliefs, I'm giving them to you when you're 5, and the rest of your life is the test of your loyalty to the things you learned when you were 5? That makes no sense. That's not a relationship. That's just like a weird abusive scenario, you know? So to realize that like we are people who are meant to grow, and part of that, like our faith and our beliefs are meant to grow along with us. And it's all okay. There's very little that is like off limits when it comes to just wondering about God and exploring, you know?
Yeah, that's good advice. And there's been so many, you've shared so many, like so much wisdom and encouragement throughout this hour that I've like written down, because I want to share some of like your quotes on social media tomorrow, and so I'm gonna have a hard time choosing because there's been
Thank
a
you.
lot. So I hope
I know
people will
every
take the
now and then
time.
something comes out and I'm like, dang it, I wish I'd read that down. That's really good. Or
Yeah,
some of
well,
it
I'm trying.
I might be like remembering something I have wordsmithed in the past and it comes out. But yeah.
Well, I'm trying to capture them, so and get them down. But
Thank you.
yeah, well, thank you for sharing with us. And you said that the article you wrote for my blog was one of your favorite things you've written, and that really honors me. And I think the people who have been able to read it, and that you would share your story, because it is vulnerable and opens you up to criticism. And it sounds like you have a thicker skin than me with how you handle criticism on social media.
Online criticism, fine. Interpersonal, different story.
Yeah. But yeah, I thank you for trusting us with that. And allowing us to see a different experience of deconstruction.
Yeah, well, and I really, like I said, there's a lot, I find that a lot of times people who still are finding God through Christianity are a little bit scared of people like me who are like, I'm going to open it up a little broader. And because of that, they don't really want to hear what it's like or learn. So it meant a lot to me that you invited me into your safe space with your people. And so thanks for the work you're doing there to foster, just openness and compassion within your community. It means a lot to me and all of the people like me out here.
Well, good, thank you. So any ways we can find you or support your work, any like resources or offerings you want to share with people listening?
I'd love to have you, if you are watching and resonate with anything, I'd love to have you with me on Instagram. I'm at Joy Vetterlein. I have a weekly email I send out. This is like the worship pastor in me who couldn't not do something on Sundays. So now I send an email, but it's sort of like a quirky, funny, unconventional way of looking at some aspect of spirituality. So I have a lot of fun with those. People tell me that's like sort of their new tradition since they don't go to church. They like wake up with their coffee and read my email, and that makes me feel really happy. But then I also have a community that I formed called the Band of Spiritual Misfits. And all it is just a safe place that's a little like shelter out of the chaos of social media, where all of your relatives and church friends are looking at what you're commenting on and liking. And it's just a place where we ask hard questions in safety together and support each other along the way. If you're having questions and don't have anyone you feel safe talking to about it, there's a lot of people in there that have the same questions and would love to talk to you about it because they don't have anyone to talk to either. So it's been really wonderful just getting to be there. So it's called the Band of Spiritual Misfits, and all that's on my website at joyvetterlein.com. So yeah, I'd love to have any of you who want or need some sort of support in your spiritual wanderings. Yeah, you're all welcome.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you again for sharing with us. And yeah, maybe you can come back and watch my interview with Tim next week. I think
I'm curious to see. I see his videos, but I am curious to see what he's like in a conversation. So that'd be great.
Yeah, and it's been a long time since I've talked to him on his podcast. So so it'll be a good talk. But and that'll be the last of my Instagram lives. Yeah, I've done 4. That'll be the 4th one. But then I am sharing my faith deconstruction journey the following week, just for email subscribers in a webinar. So I wanted it to be a little bit more private, a little bit more intimate, something on Zoom instead of on Instagram. So if anybody watching wants to sign up for that, you can join my email list and get the heads up on that. So thank you for joining us.
It goes well. Thank you. Thanks, Candom. I will see you around.
It was so nice to talk to you, Joy.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.